Hi, and welcome to today's Books Alive online event with Brian Falkner, author of Katipo Joe, Spycraft, and Kevin from Taupo District Libraries. Katipo Joe, Spycraft is a finalist in the New Zealand Book Awards for Children and Young Adults in the Young Adult Fiction category. Thank you to the New Zealand Libraries Partnership Program for the opportunity to host these events this week. Kevin and Brian, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Yes. So it's our absolute privilege and honour to meet this with Brian and talking about his book. Would you like to be able to start just by referring to the title itself and the cover? How did you come about that there for us?
All right. Well, the title of Katipo Joe, which is the name of the series, was there from the very beginning. I'm not even sure where the idea came from, to be honest with you. But from the moment that I started writing the series, or the first book, I had that title in mind. And the idea of the Katipo, the spider, that's very much a New Zealand thing, because although this is set in Europe, I always saw it as a New Zealand book. It's about a New Zealander in Europe experiencing various events during the Second World War. And I'm talking about, about the series. And so the idea of the spider and the image of the spider representing the swastika, because he is a spy, he's undercover in Nazi Germany. That was there from the very beginning. I'm not even sure where the idea came from, but this book series actually started life in 2006. So it's going back a fair while now.
It's absolutely captivating read, and it just has so many layers to it with all the characters and the storyline. You obviously like challenging yourself when you write. Is that true?
I do. And these books, perhaps more than any other books that I've written, with a possible exception of a couple of books I wrote set during the Napoleonic Wars, have involved so much research. I thought before I started the series that I knew a fair bit about the Second World War, but the more research I've done, the more I've realized how little I actually knew. And so many of the things that I've learned through doing research have come through in the book and in the book series, and including a lot of things that sound like I just made them up. In fact, anybody reading this book and thinks, oh, that's unlikely, that's just something that an author would think of. Well, truth is stranger than fiction. Mostly the strangest things that happen in these books are actually based on truth.
And you can see the research in it. You obviously put a lot of research. How much would research go into it? Is the research notes thicker than the book itself?
They really are. If I printed out all my research notes, I actually used to do that. I used to print out my notes and keep them as like a manuscript. And generally with a book like this, it would be thicker than the actual manuscript. In this case, I've made all my research notes electronically, and it's easy to index them and search them, etc. But there's a huge amount of research. I mean, a number of books that I've read, including this one here, Operative Spies and Saboteurs, and another one, The Secret History of the Second World War. Plus, I've read a lot of books about Adolf Hitler by people who knew him, by his bodyguard, by his secretary, by his valet, by his architect, Albert Speer. And these are people who knew Hitler personally, and that has enabled me to get a sense of what life was really like in Germany at that time, which has been quite important, because one of the things I didn't want to do was to be pulled up on my historical accuracy.
Yes. In that first chapter alone, when Joe's waiting to parachute from the plane, I could literally taste the fuel and the noise of the engines and explosions. The description was astounding. It really put us in there. And same with the Hitler Youth. I had no idea. I learned so much from the book. I didn't realise a lot about the Hitler Youth itself, especially how it was so expected of them, and the cold shouldering in the cities, and if they didn't join up, and the guilt. What was that research like, studying up about like Hitler Youth?
Well, that all started in the first book, in Katipo Joe's Blitzkrieg, where in the first book, Joe is much younger and he's growing up in Berlin prior to the war, and he's wanting to join the Hitler Youth, and his older friends are able to, and he envies them, and they get these shiny knives and they wear these wonderful uniforms, and to him this is a wonderful thing, of course, without the knowledge that he then gains shortly after that. And so all that research that I did for book one, I was able to carry that over into the second book, where he is now old enough to join the Hitler Youth, but it's the last thing he'd actually want to do. But he does as a spy. So it's a real sort of turnaround. It's a cycle for him.
Great. And do you also have like a trailer of the book?
Yes, I do. If I can just quickly, yes, it's very short. It's just a teaser trailer. So let me just quickly find that. Here we go. And
That's great.
very short and sweet, but it's just a very, to give, a feel for what the book series is about.
And Joe's very quick at thinking on
starting again. Hold on.
Oh.
For some reason, it started replaying itself, at least on my screen.
That's fine. I'm just saying, Joe's very quick at thinking on his feet. You can tell within the book, like that first part where he's talking to the German paratroopers when he arrives. And he gets caught out in the dark, and I love that dialogue he had with them. Stood on his face, and he comes up with the excuses as to why he's out so late. It was really well done.
It is one of the points in the book is he has to be constantly thinking on his feet, but he has to be switched on all the time. That if you were undercover in Nazi Germany during the Second World War, you can't say anything wrong. You can't. There's no slip of the tongue. You can't do anything wrong. There's a famous story about an escapee from a prisoner of war camp in Germany, I think, who looked the wrong way when crossing the road and was caught, because in Britain, of course, they drive on the left, and in Germany they drive on the right. And he looked to the wrong way, and a policeman saw him and realized he must be from Britain, and he was caught by doing this. Anything like that, it's the smallest thing that could trip you up and give you away.
And taking on his new identity there in chapter 5, that was I really enjoyed that part too, where he really takes on the new character's identity. You saw Joe's character and his empathy as well. I'm quite eager to see what happens to Jurgen himself, if he's going to resurface at all. Any plans?
Well, if without saying too much about it, but his mother sort of clears that up for him a little bit by the end of the book. So, as to what might have really happened to Jurgen. So,
And you have an IT background, is that correct?
Yes, I do. I was in IT for a long time. I was actually a journalist, my first career, and a copywriter, writing advertisements, and went through a few different careers. But most recently, it was in web development before the career as an author kind of took off and became my full-time career.
So how hard was that then for you, going back from the tech background to the 1940s and having to write from the sci-fi you usually write to a few gadgets in there? Like I loved his pencil sharpener camera.
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, it's interesting to look at the technology and look at the gadgets that were real back in the day. And one of the things I knew from the moment I started writing this series, it was not going to be what I call laser shark spy fiction. All right, I just didn't want to write that sort of James Bondy kind of a thing where they've got watches that fire laser beams and sharks with laser beams on their head, which is kind of a staple of this kind of fiction for teenage readers. Now, I really wanted to have realistic gadgets and the whole thing, that could actually have happened, although it didn't. And so in the books that I was showing you before, and books like this, they talk a lot about the gadgets, the real gadgets, and some of them were quite incredible that they came up with. And so it was really interesting to research the technology that they had in the day, which is obviously a lot more primitive than technology we have nowadays, but how that could be used for spies.
Certainly love the New Zealand references you refer to in the book too, taking us back. It's quite iconic.
Thank you.
And our viewers would probably love to hear a reading if
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I've got quite a short reading. This is actually the prologue of the book, which is sort of picking up a little bit from what happened at the end of book 1. So this is the prologue to book 2, Spycraft. Prologue, Wanborough Manor, Special Operations Executive, SOE, Training Centre, Surrey, England, 26th of May, 1941. The Irishman stops as the dog plants her paws in front of him and bares her teeth, jagged in the light of a reluctant moon. She has never bared her teeth at him before. Perhaps she can smell the blood on the knife. Flannery steps to one side, off the white pebbled path, near where a broken cartwheel, choked by long weeds, slowly rots against the side of the barn. To the other side, an old hand pump drips slowly, constantly, each plunk juddering the reflection of wispy moonlight on the surface of the water in the trough below. The dog moves with him, blocking his way. "Good girl," Flannery says softly. Her lips open wider, and she begins to snarl. In a moment, she'll bark, and everything will be lost. "Shh, Grable," he says. She's a beagle, Joe's dog, or she was. Now she belongs to Rosie, the horsey woman who lives in one of the cottages on the grounds of the old manor house. The merest thought of Joe causes Flannery to clench his teeth. Everything had been going so well before Joe came along. MI5 had suspected nothing. Flannery takes a step backwards, hoping to settle the dog. One bark will wake the inhabitants of the small village. One bark and everything will have been for nothing. He won't get another chance. What he'll get is a drop and a sudden stop at the end of a rope. He takes a firm grip on the knife, his palms sweaty despite the cool night air. "Good girl, Grable," he says, holding out a hand for her to sniff so she'll know it's him. She knows him. He's a friend. She growls again. Is she simply being protective of her new pups? Or does the beagle really have some kind of sixth sense about people? It is as if she knows what he has just done. Flannery is a bear of a man, thick-necked and broad shoulders, although now in his 40s and running to fat. But neither time nor weight has diminished his skills, honed to a fine edge, training new recruits in Churchill's secret army. When the dog draws in a breath, preparing to bark, Flannery is ready. The car is waiting for him near the intersection of the main road to Guildford. It is dark, its engine is off, and it appears to be deserted, but a door opens as he approaches, and a man in a dark suit emerges. He wears an armband with the band blue and white lightning bolt of the BUF, the British Union of Fascists. Flannery's first impression of the man is that he is a weasel. He is short and thin with a pointed snout and ears. His neck seems too long, with a bend at his Adam's apple. The man looks around carefully, checking that they are not being watched, before snapping out a Nazi salute and a quiet "Heil Hitler." When Flannery does not return the salute, the man's paw darts into his jacket and re-emerges with a pistol. "Who are you?" His voice is thin and reedy. His accent is South London. "Put your gun away. I'm the man you're waiting for," Flannery assures him. "But don't be expecting any of that Heil Hitler bollocks from me." "Are you not a believer in the cause?" the man asks, but the pistol disappears back into his pocket. "I may dance with the devil," Flannery says, "but that doesn't mean I have to kiss him goodnight." So that's the prologue leading into the chapter you mentioned earlier where Joe is sitting on a plane about to be parachuted into wartime Germany.
That's brilliant. We're often led by Joe throughout the book too, with his character taking us places and leading the story, but there's occasionally you embrace the reader and like names pop up. He's with knowledge he's yet to obtain, like Eva Braun's name turns up and he's asking, "Oh, do you know the Fuhrer?" And those sorts of characters coming into it, like Himmler. I loved all that there. How was it like trying to put real life characters into fiction?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting. Eva Braun was a really interesting case because we now know her as the longtime mistress and, for a short time, the wife of Adolf Hitler. But in Germany at the time, nobody knew that. She was a secret. So she isn't able to reveal to the kids in this book that her relationship with Hitler. And yet I wanted the reader of the book to know it. But I was able to do that because interspersed throughout the books, there are memoirs. So this is Joe as an older man reflecting on his life during the war as a young man. And so I could put information about someone like Eva Braun in the memoirs that Joe wouldn't have known at the time. So that's a really good example, actually, Eva Braun. But he does meet people like Himmler and Goebbels and Goering and obviously Hitler himself at one stage.
Yes. And do you have a favourite place that you like to write in certain environments?
I pretty much write anywhere. I do quite a lot of writing on a train, would you believe? Which is, if I am off to visit a school, when I do visit schools, they're often in Brisbane and I'm about an hour away by train. Now, I find that's really good writing time because the trip, instead of, I could drive there, I suppose, but I'd be sitting in a car getting angry with all the other cars on the M1. We're sitting on a train, I get an hour's work done there and an hour's work coming back. If I'm at home, then usually I'm writing in my office. That's most common. I will confess that I do take a laptop to bed and sit it there sometimes at night before bed or when I wake up in the morning and pick away a few lines lying in bed. I don't really have a favorite place. It's just wherever I am. If I've got my computer, I can do some work, then write a few more lines.
And does the writing itself tire you, or does it ignite you, energize you?
Yeah, a little bit of both. It really depends on what I'm writing. And sometimes when it's flowing, it's energizing. It's just recharging your batteries when it's really flowing well. And when it's not flowing, it's exhausting, but you just have to keep on going. One of my favorite quotes about writing is from a writer named Shannon Hale, who says that I'm writing a first draft. I'm simply shoveling sand into a box so that later I can build castles. Well, shoveling sand into a box is exhausting. It's hard work and you're not really happy with what you've done, but you know that you can then use that later on to do something quite special. So you keep doing it, but it's tiring. And the days when it does all work, when you throw a shovel full of sand into a box and it just happens to form a perfect sandcastle, those are the good days.
And you mentioned about going to the schools. I remember I had the privilege years ago when you were here, took you around the district to a few country schools.
And the bus.
And on the mobile library bus, we took you there. And you had a wonderful competition as well. But while you were there, you just lit up the room. You just captified the kids and you're so engaging to watch. But you had a competition as well with the Coca-Colas and things, and you used the children's names who won the particular competitions. Do you still do that with using the
No, I don't. The competition was based on my book, The Real Thing, which is a second book that was published. And it refers to a character, in the book who has the ability to tell between different flavors of cola. He's like a wine connoisseur, but with cola drinks. And so as a fun competition, we'd take along 5 different flavors of cola, Pepsi and Coke and Diet Coke and Vanilla Coke. I can't remember what the other ones were. And we'd have a little taste test competition within the school where certain kids would taste them. Now, if anybody got all 5 right, they actually won. The prize was to have their name in one of my books. So in a lot of my books, you'll find at the beginning or sometimes at the end, a list of the kids whose names have been used as the names of characters in the book. Now, I didn't do that with this Katipo Joe series. I really wanted, most of the characters, or a lot of them are actually real characters anyway. And the other ones, particularly in Katipo Joe's Spycraft, they're German names. So I couldn't have used a lot of the names anyway.
And when this book was written, was it during COVID times? And if so, how difficult was it and different?
Well, the good thing, if there's a good thing about COVID, is that it reduced my traveling a lot. The school visits were out the window for a year. So I had a lot more time for research, a lot more time for writing. And the same thing actually has happened this year, where the visits that I do to schools have been vastly reduced, still because of COVID. And again, I've had a lot more time for the writing. Now, these books are very, very hungry in terms of research, and the writing is very involved. So having had that extra time, I think has been a good thing in terms of the production of the manuscript, in terms of the writing. But yeah, both this and the next one that I'm currently working on are written during COVID times.
Yes. And you provided that real feel, like within the U-boats themselves. You really put us in there, like only be able to surface 3 times a day and at night. And I love the settings you had, but especially also with the characters, which must have been difficult with when the Hitler Youth there, for instance, engaging for the first time. The character really came out of the dialogue, which is a wonderful thing you did.
Well, the dialogue, I think, in those days would have been very, very different to the way that teenagers talk today. And I kind of had to find a middle ground. I couldn't use, the current way that people talk and, how kids like saying like and literally, I literally died. And, I couldn't use those kinds of phrases in a book set in the 1940s. But if I used the actual vernacular, although it was most of it, of course, is in German anyway, so it would be different again. But if I'd used those kinds of phrases, then it wouldn't have been right. And if I'd used the sort of phrases they'd used for real back in those days, it would have been hard to understand by modern young people. So I sort of had to find a middle ground that didn't sound false, that was believable as the way teenagers might have talked in those days, that was still readily accessible to modern teenagers.
And, sorry. And just wondering too, how can libraries offer help or support writers? Can they help with holiday programs or things?
Yeah, well, look, most authors, unless they're incredibly famous, and in Australia, there might be 3 or 4, I live in Australia, obviously, there might be 3 or 4 that fit into this category that can earn their living entirely from their royalties. It's very, very hard for an author to earn a living only on the royalties of their books. Andy Griffiths is one. Is someone that I know that is able to do that. Most authors aren't. So most authors support their writing by traveling and talking and teaching kids writing in schools. And, if there are library programs where you could bring authors into libraries and have them talk to kids in libraries during the holidays or whenever that might be, that'd be wonderful for authors. And there's so many authors traveling around New Zealand that would appreciate the opportunity to do that. So I think that's something that authors, a very practical thing that authors can do, that libraries can do for authors. Because, if the authors cannot earn a living, they aren't able to write. You basically have to give up their writing and, go and get a job somewhere. So the ability to earn a living through the writing and through speaking about writing, I think that's incredibly important for authors.
And I certainly didn't expect the mother to turn up in the book there, Joe's mother, right there on the site. And that was great. How did you go about creating that tension?
The thing about the mother being there, see, in book 1, that's all set up. At the end of book 1, he is actually going into Germany to rescue his mother. That's the very ending of book 1. So when we get to book 2, and he finds out that he's actually been lied to about that in this world of cloak and dagger, nothing is quite what it seems, and you can't trust anyone, not even the people on the same side. But then when he finds out that without revealing too much about the story, his mother is actually there, but then, things take a turn, a kind of a dark turn as far as his mother is concerned, which leads into the last part of the book. But, having Joe's mother involved, your mother, it's someone you love. It's someone that's very close to you. So the sort of the emotional attachment he had to her is at the core of the book. It's the emotional heart of the book, I think. And it was in book 1 as well. His emotional attachment to his mother forms, well, as I said, it's the emotional core of the book. It's one of the reasons why we can relate to Joe in the way we do.
And then when he betrays her, what a predicament. When for the obvious outcome and to be able to stay close to where he is, to remain keep his identity intact. That was magic. Yeah, that must have been difficult to write.
Unfortunately, betrayal is a theme throughout the Katipo Joe series, and one of the things that he does is to look back in later life and talk about that. In fact, just very quickly, there's a quote here. This is from his memoirs that I use this in the book. This is on the nature of spiders. With very few exceptions, spiders are ambush predators They lie in wait for their victims, then attack. Some spiders eat other spiders. The Portia jumping spider mimics the movements of insects on other spiders' webs. When the owner of the web arrives to eat the insect, they instead get eaten by the Portia. My nickname was Katipo, but in some ways I think Portia would have been more apt. The deceiver, the betrayer, the eater of its own kind. From the memoirs of Katipo Joe. So, yeah, that's how he, looking back, that's how he sees himself, as a deceiver, as a betrayer. And he actually betrays his own mother in this book.
Mm. And you see his character too changing, where he elopes, takes on that whole identity, and he gets lost a bit in it, and where he's going to thinking of killing the Sophie, the girl on the train who knows his identity, possibly, which I'm still not quite sure at the time. That was brilliant. And then his mother says the iconic line of, "My God, what have we done to you?"
He does change throughout the series, and he grows. One of the issues he has to face is the risk of actually becoming who he's pretending to be. And I think that's fairly genuine worry for someone in that situation, that he's surrounded by all these people, and he can't afford to become like them. He knows inherently that what they're doing is incredibly wrong and devastating for the world and for people. So he must somehow avoid, becoming trapped in his own web, if you like, and actually becoming like them.
And lastly, you've been asked this a lot. What advice would you have for upcoming authors?
Yeah, well, that's a kind of we could spend all day talking about that. The one thing, probably the most significant advice I try to give kids who ask me that question is to make the characters real, that the reader really needs to believe. While they're reading the book, they need to believe in the character. They need to believe that the character is real. It's very hard to care about a character who doesn't seem real. So making the character and making the situations, making all of that seem real for the reader while they're reading the book, even though they know in the back of their mind that the character is made up, that the story is fiction. But if they can believe it while they're reading it, then, you're a long way ahead. So that's probably the most important piece of advice I have for young writers.
I'm so looking forward to the next book coming out. But would you give us the honour of another last final reading?
Right, we don't have. How long do we actually have? I'm lost for the time.
Oh, actually, we do about a minute. Yes, a minute or two.
Already got about a minute. Let me just another of the memoir sections, because they're really short. So this is the opening memoir from the book. I've been accused of whitewashing the Nazi leadership in my memoirs. Some people say I make them seem human, but therein lies the problem. I saw these men up close. They were human. If we think of them only as monsters and demons, we may lose sight of the fact that they were very much like you and I. They had the same number of eyes, ears, and limbs. If we forget what humans are capable of, we risk it happening all over again.
That's wonderful. Yeah, Brian Falkner, thank you for your time. We've certainly appreciated your books and certainly the talk. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye for now.